Can you guys jump on the panel? Excellent, and great to see you. I think especially Ali, I think you get a special prize for staying up later than anybody in this entire program today. Thank you so much for coming in the middle of your night.
It's my pleasure to be here. Yeah, and I was just looking at the time. It's 12:45 a.m. So just had a cup of coffee, so I stay awake.
It's an early start. So the topic, as we heard in the last session, you know, there's a running theme here. It's digital inclusivity, but generally the sessions today, we've been going deeper and deeper into more and more challenging operational environments. And we've saved perhaps the most challenging of all for this last session, and that is how, when, where, why, and with whom can digital inclusivity actually be delivered in the midst of a disaster. Is this simply a charity proposition? Or is there a way to come at this challenge in a way that is, and we'll say it not for the first time today, sustainable? So we are depending on you guys to let us have some insight into the answer to that question. And what I'd like to do is, in fact, let me just say, all three of you, I don't need to tell you this, but I want everyone in the room to know that all three of you are currently involved in projects related to real-time disasters right now. Ali with the floods in Pakistan, Jose Luis with Hurricane Fiona relief and response underway in Puerto Rico, and Joe, who's a member of the N50 project management team in operation in Poland, Romania, Moldova, and soon Ukraine. So with that, I'd like to kick off. If each of you could take a turn and just introduce yourselves and what brings your organization to the subject of disaster preparedness, response, recovery, resilience, and where in that does digital inclusivity fit for you and your organization and those who you work with. And Ali, since it's latest in your neighborhood, why don't you kick us off?
Right, thank you for the opportunity. So just a brief introduction. I am the business unit head for telecoms and defense at Supernet. Supernet is Pakistan's largest satellite communications service provider and systems integrator. We do a host of services ranging from satellite broadband to cellular backhaul for telehealth, telemedicine, for the financial sector, oil and gas, energy, construction, and all. With the floods, I'm sure you guys must have seen some of the statistics that are out there. Around 2,000 lives lost, hundreds of thousands of homes gone, 20,000 schools completely destroyed. Many of them won't be reopening again. You've got 1 million livestock gone. You've got the topsoil eroded from about a third of the country, which is now causing concerns related to food shortages. You've got, as the water is receding, you've got waterborne diseases that are happening. You've got cholera, you've got dengue fever. So it's quite a bit of a disaster. I mean, it's estimated at around $40 billion worth of damage so far. It's going to increase as, you know, the understanding becomes a bit better about the magnitude. So in that specific area, what we've managed to do is, because a lot of the terrestrial infrastructure was also damaged. You had damages to the power sector. I mean, You had the fiber cables that were deployed. They got kind of wiped out as well, and it took time to fix them. So requiring critical communications, we were able to keep some of the cellular networks up and running because of our experience with cellular backhaul, using a host of different satellite constellations, both in the geostationary and the medium Earth orbit satellites as well. We are currently in the process of deploying a large number of broadband links for remote branches and ATMs for banks. People need access to money as they're moving around all over the place. Money right now for them is really critical. You do have agencies providing them with food, shelter, and everything, but not everybody has access to all of that. And a lot of these people do have their own funds available to them, as low or as high as they may be, and access to those funds because of the lack of connectivity for let's say ATMs or branches became a problem. And then we are deploying all of this. We've done a few hundred of those links all over the place. We're also partnering up with some NGOs at the moment for teleeducation and telemedicine projects, because as I just told you, specifically in terms of schools, about 20,000 are gone, right? And some of them aren't going to open up again. So how many kids does that make in terms of losing the number of years of education? What are they going to go back to? We're still ascertaining that, because the floodwater is still there. As it recedes, all of this is going to start becoming clearer, and the damage would, recovering from that damage would go on for a couple of years at least, or 3, 4, 5 years to that extent. So all of this digital inclusivity in terms of some of the projects that I just listed will continue. And then that's where we are in terms of what we do as an organization. That's what we are doing for all of the different entities out there in terms of connecting them, helping them stay connected. Yeah.
So Ali, your company, Supernet, is a for-profit communication service provider. You answer to shareholders. You have to make a return on investment. How can you operate in support of disaster relief efforts? What is typical for Supernet in this setting is one question. You mentioned financial services, education, and telehealth as 3 examples of what we may fairly describe as digital inclusion. I'm wondering, those types of services, longer term, does that become part of your business portfolio? I'm just trying to get a sense of how is your company as a for-profit entity able to sustain itself in working in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery?
Right. So let's take that bit by bit. Let's start off with the financial sector. So we have been aligned with them in terms of providing services to them for quite a bit of time. A lot of those services generate the kinds of profits that keep that portion of the product line or the service line profitable for us. And redirecting some of those profits, whether it's at a break-even point for disaster areas, kind of still makes sense for us, because overall the portfolio is at a certain size where, if you add a few hundred sites or even, like 200, 300 sites, you do offsite ATMs and that sort of business, it's not going to, pinch us even, right? Because the kind of services that we provide, when I say broadband, we've gotten to the point where it's around $50 per month in terms of providing connectivity, like a 5 gig kind of a link. So we've gone into the technical details. You know, an offsite ATM is shoots traffic in small bursts, because as the user kind of uses it, it's small bursts, doesn't use a lot of bandwidth. So $40-50 per month is maybe our cost. A couple of hundred sites for us won't hurt us that much in terms of the overall portfolio, but for the people out there, the impact that it has is exponential in terms of them having access to those funds, right? And it kind of feeds into the corporate social responsibility portion of the business as well. So you can redirect some of the budgets that you would probably spend on marketing and that sort of stuff, and you just kind of provide these elements for free or at break even to the banking industry or the financial services industry, and so that they can kind of deploy them. Coming to telehealth, telemedicine kind of projects, those are generally quite well funded from international donors or national donors as well. So the funds are all obviously available there as well. And again, in terms of the kinds of products that we use there, in terms of the connectivity that we provide there, those are again not very high cost. Again, this $40-50 per month. So if we need to absorb it or keep it at a break even, we do tend to keep it at a break even. In terms of the overall size of our business, how much can we take out and not want to earn a profit or anything, you know, I mean, regularly that we would do if we were serving another commercial organization. So that's how we reorient ourselves in these times, and then, you know, get things done.
So you mentioned that some of those who you're working with to provide telehealth and telemedicine services are well funded. Can you name examples of the types of organizations that you're working with in that space?
Yeah, so those are NGOs. I would avoid naming any particular NGO at this moment for confidentiality reasons as well, that we, you know, the contracts and all. So, but they are NGOs. They have backing from multiple international donors as well. You know, the World Bank's there. They fund projects. You've got the Asian Development Bank. You've got across the board the UN organizations. You've got funding coming in from there as well. You've got US aid, you've got UK aid, and all of these organizations are there. They're providing the funds, and then you've got local government entities as well who provide the funds. You've got private donors. So small scale teleeducation, telemedicine projects at the end of the day are doable. We provide the connectivity portion. Those NGOs themselves are working with other entities to develop the content, or they do have content or content that is generally available online, such as the Khan Academy, right? So you need to teach kids maths. I mean, it's all there. It's on the internet. All you need is access to that. Maybe you need a few tablets per classroom. One project that we did during previous years was specifically help an NGO teach 4th grade and 5th grade mathematics to an area that had around 27 schools, right? So there was this van, we'd pack up everything in it, along with all of the SATCOM equipment and the access equipment, such as the tablets and all, and then they would kind of go from one school, spend a couple of hours there, go to the next, go to the next, and go to the next. So that way they ended up covering a number of schools. That is one example of the teleeducation project that was done. Another one was telehealth, where the NGO partner trained a local couple, a husband and a wife, you know, seeing the cultural aspects of Pakistan, right? And you know, so it's female doctors for female patients and male doctors for male patients, or male attendants for male patients, or female attendants for female patients. And as the patients would come in, so they would kind of, you know, help measure the blood pressure, or you know, get them to open up their mouths so that they can look inside, see the condition and all. And then, you know, the actual relay of the information was happening over the satellite link to the doctor who was sitting in one of the major urban areas as well. So the local part was all there, managed by the NGO, training local people as well. And then, we were making sure that the connectivity was there back to the doctors as well, taking care of specifically the technical portion and keeping them all up and running throughout. So these are the few examples of what we were doing.
So one more question, and it's a type of question I want to get in front of you, Jose Luis, and yourself, Joe, also, and that is taking a step back from the immediate disaster that is underway right now, the relief effort. The work that you're doing, Ali, over time, is it, as it relates to disasters, is it all response, or are you actually involved in activities related to preparedness?
So it's primarily response, but we are working with organizations such as the Meteorological Department and the National and Provincial Disaster Management Authorities as well, in terms of having all of their connectivity needs taken care of prior to disasters happening, such as, for example, in the PMD, the meteorological departments, you've got these SATCOM links available in the remote areas of the country, and they have sensors, so they can accurately measure data in different areas, and they can then try and be prepared ahead of time and be able to predict what happens. But at the end of the day, and for me personally, I keep getting frustrated year after year that these are not isolated events. They keep recurring. Specifically in Pakistan, you keep having floods. So it's one of the most stressed countries vis-a-vis climate change. It's considered amongst the top 5 most stressed countries. Outside the polar regions, you have the highest number of glaciers in Pakistan. They melt more and more every year. So in addition to the monsoon rains, you have all of this melted ice that turns into water, adds on top of it, and the floods keep coming. What I try and have conversations about is that you have all of these different organizations that generate all of this data, like the meteorological departments and the disaster management authorities, and then you have Earth observation satellites up there. You kind of, if you end up combining all of this data from space, from ground, all of this sensor data as well, you should be able to predict, and we should have been able to predict more accurately on where the rainfall was coming, how much amount it was going to fall in any specific area. If we could have warned those people ahead of time. We have about 120 million 4G users in the country, which means information could have been sent out to those users by the mobile network operators, were they brought into the loop, predicting and informing ahead of time so that disaster wouldn't have been as bad as it was. So mind you, a lot of the areas that got affected are the ones that we've seen affected year after year after year, because something that happens in Pakistan, unfortunately, is that people end up building hotels, houses, or all of this infrastructure along the same paths where the floodwater comes year after year after year, right? And we can predict all of this. We can see through Earth observation satellites that Pakistan has one of its own, and then you have all of these organizations around the world where we can get this data, correlating it, understanding it, seeing if the amount of rainfall is getting higher, or you've got the glaciers melting. You can predict with with a high degree of certainty and in which area is going to get affected, and trying and warning those people through a mechanism that is already in place in terms of 120 million people having access to 4G mobile phones. Why can't there be apps that kind of warn them and get them out? So unfortunately, we haven't, across the spectrum of the ecosystem, all of these different organizations, we've not been able to bring them onto one platform, coalesce their data into an actionable warning system so that the effects can be mitigated, and the disaster recovery process is less difficult as it is when when it's coming, it happens, and then you're kind of moving after the event to try and get everything up and running. I mean, that's that. If that happens, when that happens, you probably see less of us in the news, but we're not there yet. How long would it take us to get there? This would have to happen at a governmental level, be driven by them, but all of these different government and private entities getting on board, and then collaborating. This would be a kind of collaboration that's not happened in the country in its history so far, and if we end up doing it, it would create a lot of difference.
It's interesting, in our last session, we wound up talking quite a bit about public policy and the need to have all of the ministries in the room together, because there are so many elements of complexity in optimizing the provision of digital solutions into the most remote areas and also the most challenging areas. And here we are again. Very, very interesting. Second thought that comes to mind, there's an organization that we've been working with out in the tribal country of the Western United States. We had a session on that as well earlier today. And there is an organization called the Airborne Snow Observatory, and they use LiDAR on aircraft to fly by mountain ranges, and they can measure with high degree of accuracy the thickness of the snowpack and of glaciers in a way where you can forecast availability of water resources in the coming season, as well as the potential for, of course, flooding. And I know they've looked at the Himalaya as a possible target site for preparedness. And maybe that's something we could take away from this conversation to explore together. There's so much more I'd like to ask you, but before I do, and by the way, for everyone else who's in the room, if you have questions or comments at any point, please don't hesitate to enter them into the chat bar, and I'll do my best to include them in the conversation here. Ali, I want to go to another of our speakers who I think shares a certain degree of frustration, like you, with the overemphasis on response and the lack of attention given to preparedness. Jose Luis, I'm calling on you next. If you could, please introduce yourself, CPR, and how they came into being and where you're sitting. And you're on mute.
Thank you very much, David and N50, for inviting me to participate in this forum, along Ali, which has very well informed us about the situation in Pakistan. Usually, we don't get that information in our media, and for me, it's very important to understand what other people are going through. David, you asked the question about response, and I think that's a very good point to start, because most of the time, in fact, when I came involved in disasters, it was basically the response portion of it. I used to run a television network which worked very closely in the response after the disasters, mainly in Puerto Rico, Haiti, and even Sandy in New York City. And one of the things that I learned when I came to Puerto Rico after Maria, and these were the genesis of the organization that I'm working with now, the Caribbean Preparedness and Response, Inc., CPR. This is where we really started working on the response, learned a great deal of the response. And it's very important, when I indicate what we have learned for people to understand what Puerto Rico is. Puerto Rico is an island, it's a country in the middle of the Caribbean, is in hurricane lane, and to a certain extent, earthquake lane as well. And Puerto Rico have a special relationship with the United States. Puerto Ricans are American citizens, and a lot of resources that are available in the U.S. For response, like FEMA, to us Puerto Ricans. So that's a very important point that should be made here. That said, we have had challenges in making sure that those those efforts, those resources, are used wisely and appropriately. In fact, Puerto Ricans will tell you right now that there are 3 storms or 3 disasters going right now. One is Fiona, which we are overcoming little by little. The other one is the energy company, which failed compared to other similar hurricanes in the past. The response has been behind. Even in areas where we were not hit, we were impacted directly in a negative way, of course. And the third disaster is the bureaucracy, both the federal and the local bureaucracy. So we have to deal with these challenges. Now, what we learned from Maria, which was the Category 5 hurricane that came after Maria, also another Category 5 hurricane, which didn't last as long as Maria, but definitely created a situation that we were hit by, as we call colloquially, a double whammy. And Maria presented challenges that are still have not been, in my view, addressed properly. So CPR was born out of a group of us that were involved in the response effort. And we realized that communications was really one of the most important elements or components, not only to response, but to recovery. And the lack of communications in Puerto Rico set us back, set the recovery back tremendously. But not only set the response back, but lives were lost in Puerto Rico. You know, we are a small island, 3.1 million people, and we lost over 4,000 people in Maria. And that's, the proportion. I'm sure that in Pakistan, there's a larger numbers when you have a catastrophe. But for us, those are large numbers. Not only there were large numbers because people died, but also a large percentage of the Puerto Rican population decided to emigrate, which is creating tremendous difficulties for Puerto Rico. Young people are leaving, elder people are staying behind, and that it by itself is creating challenges. The demographics also in Puerto Rico is negative right now. So this is the landscape, or that we have to deal with. But CPR, we decided to look at how communications impacted, and what can we do to make sure that that's in the future that doesn't happen again. So that forces us to concentrate in the planning and the preparedness. And we noticed that we to give you an example, we went to a small island in Puerto Rico. We connected the hospital, we connected the police department, who was using walkie-talkies for 2 or 3 months to communicate. Obviously, the community could not communicate with them. We connected the only farm available in the area, that the employees and the animals in that farm were about to die because water was not coming in. And so, so they found that the ability or the necessity to achieve communications was key. Otherwise, they would close, they would shut down. I'm talking about the farm. We also connected a school in the island as well. So we were able to obtain in a micro situation a lot of experience that they themselves were telling us, this happened today. We don't want to wait for the next one. We want to sit down with you and plan with you how we're going to prepare for the next one. And they were the one who instructed us to come with strategies that were critical for preparation. And to give you a very small example, we were using satellite technology. Well, they told us we cannot wait for a technician from the island to come here from the main island and help put that antenna up or fine tune or whatever. You have to train us here doing that. Well, guess what? Our first training that we did was, in installing and tuning a satellite dish. Okay, that was paramount. That was critical. And at least 2 young people were trained. So now all the sites in the islands, there were people right there who can put those antennas 1 hour after the storm was over to put them in operation. And they were able to get voice, data, and video. And those three services can allow you to do multiple things. So the other idea that we obtained from, we were connecting financial institutions that for about 3 months, people could not get cash or get any funding from that institution. So we were the first one in a city that, believe it or not, has some of the one of the largest corporations in Aguadilla, Honeywell, you name it, the large companies there. And the people there, their employees, were not able to make transactions. So we connected them. And when we told them that we were getting together and to plan for the preparations, they asked me, "Oh, you're doing that? How can we get involved?" And I told them, "You want to get involved with what we're doing?" They said, "Of course," because we have different sector here of our community that if we had planned, if we had discussed with each other and planned, we could have resolved so many issues that we were confronted with. So they themselves told us, we need to connect to the hardware stores. We need to connect to the clinic, to the hospital. We need to connect with the senior centers. They were giving us advice as to those sectors in the community that needed to be connected. So that gave us the information that we need to make sure that we focus on those. In fact, not only we're looking at the cooperatives, we're looking at other financial institutions that would like to be connected. So that kind of input is critical. And if there's a principle here in terms of digital inclusion that we have to look and understand and pursue, the first one is connectivity. Okay, that's what we did in the island. We connected people immediately. And once they were connected, they immediately were able to communicate with each other. Not only that, but they were able to start addressing other higher level issues that they had. So connectivity is key. What else do we find out? We found out that the diaspora in Puerto Rico was the most important factor in helping certain municipalities with resources, including money, water, believe it or not, coming from the US, and people. And they, I remember this small town, they told us, we got about $2 million so far from the diaspora, and they're helping us, but we can hardly communicate with them. It's very difficult. We have to, we could do much better if we had that communication. So we realized that the diaspora played a major role in those municipalities, that they transcend the governmental structure. We also learned that there were a lot of international organizations also that came to Puerto Rico. And I'm sure David remember in Panama, that was made very clear. There were international organizations that in Puerto Rico, very few people, only those that were impacted, know about. The government never learned about it, okay? And they came in and provided services, connectivity in those, what I call mobile connectivity, for temporary, but it was critical for the response and recovery. Well, those things need to be planned. So that's where CPR is. Again, CPR have addressed a number of sectors that are required to be part of a planning effort to provide a response and recovery in Puerto Rico. And we have decided to develop a model of what we call digital communication centers. And these are centers that are being equipped with satellite communications in the case of Puerto Rico, and also terrestrial technology, because we are agnostics. Whatever works and connect people, we connect. But also, we are also providing them with alternative power. We learn right now in Fiona, we reinforce that power is critical. An alternative renewable power is critical in these climate change conditions that we have in the Caribbean. And the other thing is, even, believe it or not, water. Water has been a challenge. We have a lot of rainfall in Puerto Rico, and the water gets very contaminated very quickly. It becomes a challenge for people, first responders even, to provide services because they don't have clean water. So we don't want them to be concerned about looking water for here or there. And you won't believe this. Somebody was telling us last week, make sure that those centers have a shower. And I laugh because I remember when we were providing a response after Maria, all the employees that came to us from far, half hour, 1 hour away, the first thing they demanded, besides food, was a place to shower. So these are simple things, but this is something that you learn. So the point here is that the digital inclusion, and that's what I want to get into now. Once you have these centers, and once you have this connectivity, you must address the digital inclusion. And that's done in multiple ways. First, the community must be trained in terms of what are the possibilities if you want them to participate and have input and get involved. So the digital inclusion, as far as we're concerned, is paramount in a model where you are trying to do preparedness. People, if they're not connected, they cannot get telehealth, they cannot get business services, and they cannot educational services. I'm talking about education, and I think this is very important that we highlight. And that happens with the pandemic. In that island, we have connected, still a connection lives up to this day. And they have fiber. Okay, I want to clarify that. For some reason, during the pandemic, that fiber didn't work. And we found ourselves with 40% of the teachers not having access to the internet. The students didn't have access to the internet either, very few, maybe 80%. And parents all of a sudden were entrusted to be teachers, entertainers at home, and deal with responsibilities that they have never dealt with before. And we had a connection in one of the libraries in Puerto Rico, in the school, and the parents came to that facility to learn, first of all, how to use it, because they didn't know, there was no digital literacy. They have to learn how the system works, basics, okay? We have to teach them. Well, we don't have to wait for a disaster for that to happen. That should be done now. And a very important point that I want to mention, because we are small and sometimes it's bypassed, and I think this is important even for larger organizations. We have to decentralize as much as we can that type of service, the teaching, the digital inclusion. We have to bring it to have to then decentralize it and democratize it, because that's the only way that we will be able to get the community involved. When we need an effective response, they will have, in one hand, the facility to be able to respond and to transmit their needs in real time. Those facilities, in our case, will be connected to the diaspora that will mobilize and provide the necessary and the resources that are required in those situations, and not and not goods or that can be bogged down in the port of San Juan for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and they get lost. So this is the type of interconnection that technology provides for both for the centers in the digital centers that we're creating in Puerto Rico, and the digital centers that we are also creating in the diaspora. So that communications could take place way before an emergency. And the other thing I want to make is all the disasters are different. I think Ali mentioned that, the way you deal with the pandemic, I mean, there are commonalities, but there are different characteristics to all of them. The way you deal with the hurricanes, even the hurricanes are different. There's a difference between a category 1 and a category 5 and a tropical storm. They all impact in a different way. But in the planning, you can, you can predict, and we don't want to go through what Mike Tyson said, that you can have a nice plan and you get the first knockout, the self punch in the face, and you forget the plan. Well, you might forget that plan, but you have at least look and plan enough that you will be able to immediately accommodate and shift to what is necessary. So I hope I have given you in a nutshell what is it that we're doing, and if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Jose Luis, thank you. If you're running for office, you have my vote. And I think I saw Ali nodding north and south several points in your presentation. So you're striking a lot of common chords, Jose Luis, particularly with regard to preparedness, which is exciting to us at N50. The sand is running through the hourglass, and I want to get to Joe next. Joe is currently eyeball deep in a response effort, which is transitioning perhaps into now a recovery effort. We hope so. It's not a natural disaster, it's an unnatural disaster. And I'm going to let Joe tell you about what N50 and its partners who are involved on that particular project have been doing, and where that is headed, and what all of it has to say about digital inclusivity. Joe?
Yeah, thanks very much, David. And it was really good to hear from Ellie and Jose Luis about the situations in these clearly disaster-prone regions where we know that there's going to be recurrence of natural disasters, and we need to start to do the best right things before, during, and after the natural disasters as they come. And I think Ali, you outlined quite a few of those that make us get more prepared when we know that the next one is imminent. The response to the Ukrainian situation was quite unique and different from other responses that I worked on in Haiti, a slow-moving response in Dadaab in the Horn of Africa when there was a severe drought in 2011, 2012, and we're able to do a lot of the things in those responses in terms of creating a more resilient communications infrastructure. Some of the things that were being talked about in the earlier session about lowering the cost of services so that more people could be included, and more digital inclusion at large could be possible, based on affordable and persistent connectivity and good bandwidth and all of those things. So N50 was quite good in being ready to support the Ukraine situation. They came up with, before I came back in, and was very happy and honored to work on the response with I see as a innovative yet generally used solution. It was a portable connectivity center, which is basically a 20 by 40-foot container solution. But it was the things that we thought about and the things that were put in it to make it very flexible in terms of how it's supported and can support to place people in Ukraine, refugees in the border countries outside of Ukraine. Because first, we had this unprecedented influx of people into the border countries. We're working in Poland, Romania, Moldova, and that crisis was, there were millions of people, crossing the border. But that happened quite quickly, and quite quickly we found that we were more in this integration phase in the border countries and looking to do reconstruction in Ukraine. So a lot of things are going on at once. Normally in a disaster, you'd be doing preparedness, the event would come, and then you'd be doing your recovery. In some ways, it's very, very different with the Ukrainian situation, that all three phases are occurring at the same time, because you still have a lot of movement of people, Ukrainians, out of Ukraine, back into Ukraine, and then at the same time, the challenges of assimilating the populations into the border countries. So that digital inclusion is prominent right now. And all of the services and the forethought that went into what sort of applications and services will this portable connectivity center need to deliver? Things like digital programs and services, information about shelters, education, as what's been talked about, telemedicine, especially in Ukraine, especially for displaced people, and especially because they're in a war zone. Protection services, security, anti-trafficking, in the border countries, workforce development, language learning, older population, distinctly needing different services in these host countries that have now taken Ukrainians into their communities. And the NGOs that we're working with are doing quite well at starting to deliver and digitally include the Ukrainian people and also the marginalized people in these poorer communities in, places in certain districts in Bucharest, for example, in Romania, and other places, and basically being able to have a society where, we can optimize digital inclusion and service delivery. Just today I was on a call because we are deploying another one of these assets, a portable connectivity center to Galach with Core Response, one of our N50 partners. There were issues around food that Core was working on, vouchers and different centers that weren't being enabled, that were at one time and now aren't. So there's a lot of moving pieces in Europe right now. There's a lot going on in Ukraine, and a lot of discussion that we're having also with the Ministry of Digital Transformation about deploying portable connectivity centers as municipal points of presence in communities where they feel it's a safe place to come back to now, but things have been destroyed. So it's a way to have a presence and be able to build back a community. We also are finding that a lot of the information, because again of the forethought and the insight of the N50 partners, these corporations that said to us, hey, we have people, in Ukraine, we have people in these border countries that are being overwhelmed with, new populations, during the crisis, now with the integration, and we can help in the community. And we are going to be a week from Monday, on October 17th, we're going to be opening up a new center in a Ukrainian community center in Galach, which is a small city on the Danube, close to the border of Ukraine. And it's going to be a community-based effort, along with the NGOs and along with the partnerships that we fostered. Intel, for example, has employees in that community. We have a couple of Intel, one really, in particular, who has been very much giving us information, what's going on in the community, like this morning, a food shortage. What's working well, what's not working well, introducing us to government officials while we were there, being able to do translation. So the whole part of community and the part that plays, and being able to reach out very early and engaging where the issues are, is really critical in terms of once we need to be doing the response. And we're seeing very much now there are meaningful, substantive things to do with technology before, during, and after. Preparedness, reconstruction, resilience, being so much more ready, and the things Jose Luis was talking about and Ellie was talking about. What do we need to do after the storm has passed, so that we are better able and in better position, for the next one. And we know what those things are. And I think there's more of a will today amongst certainly the N50 partners, amongst the NGO community, our UN partners and coordination partners that we've been working with, in Ukraine. And things are going much better, much faster, I think, than expected in some ways, and there are massive challenges in other ways. I think it's interesting that Jose Luis has talked about, and we've had good conversations about the value of the diaspora, and also, the situation where it's unfortunate that people had to leave their homeland, right? Well, that's coming into play now, because Ukrainians are needing to communicate back with their families in Ukraine, and they're coming assimilated into these different countries, into these different societies, and that those services as well are critical coming into play. We're thinking about those. And this portable connectivity center, with the applications, with the services, with the NGO programs, is quite good in terms of how we are able to respond to the different phases in the Ukrainian situation, the refugee crisis, the need to assimilate people into the border countries, the host countries, and also the displaced peoples in Ukraine.
Hey, Joe, Richard Parker, who is here with us from Food for the Hungry, has his hand raised. Richard, did you have a question for Joe or for the panel generally, or another member of the panel?
You know, it's really more of a comment, but I just want to speak to what, well, first of all, thank you, David, and thank you, Joe, for hosting this conversation. It's been great, but just a comment that Joe had about, you know, making sure that we're doing something before, during, and after. Ukraine is a very unique situation, given that it is a developed in a lower middle income country, but thinking about where, you know, Food for the Hungry, for instance, operates in these low income countries and developing countries, you know, technology is really a game changer there. And especially one of the things that we're trying to do, and we're thrilled to be an N50 partner, as well as looking at some of this, is how can we use technology to help prepare countries either in the face of a disaster, if there's a relief situation that's happening, or before that happens. You're right that we know what the shocks and stresses are most likely going to be coming up, particularly from a climate perspective, or where earthquakes are going to happen, where hurricanes are going to happen, et cetera. But how can we actually work with communities to prepare them for the future, so that they can withstand those shocks and stresses on their own, and we can begin to move them off of a development mindset, so to speak. And so that's one of the things that we're really interested in doing, and working from a resilience perspective. And a lot of the, you know, really exciting things that I know we're talking with you guys about will help to be able to do that in some of the lower income countries, and then particularly some of the things I know that we're talking about from a refugee context as well. So I think that that's something that's really emerging, and that we're looking at. And you hear the resilience word, you know, it's a $10 word that's used a lot in development, but it's something that does truly really make a difference. And I think you know, you've been able to see that in the instance where you've got like polio that's happening right now, that's occurring in countries. But one of the reasons that we know that is really through the surveillance that began during the COVID crisis, for instance, or that was done through an HIV/AIDS intervention called the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. So those capacities were increased for testing. And so that's one of the reasons why we're able to spot those things and to take care of them more quickly. And so that's a technology achievement, but also something that helps us to be able to better prepare for the future and to know where responses are going to be needed. So I think that, you know, technology is just a huge game changer. And I think the possibilities are really, you know, limitless for us to be able to use technology to help countries to be able to become resilient. And it's like the old adage, you know, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. And so if we can help countries in having the bandwidth that they need and having the technological tools that they need, then that's something that's really going to pay off for the long term. Just a small, quick example, during COVID, our education programs, for instance, had to you know, convert to home learning. And if you thought that was difficult in the US to do, you know, imagine a small rural village in Uganda or in Guatemala, for instance. But we were able to spring into action really quickly and to try to put together some tools for our schools to be able to use so that they could happen in a low bandwidth setting. So I think it's you know, making sure that we have technology like that in programs like our education programs, for instance. So in case there is, God forbid, another pandemic, that we're really prepared for that. But thank you so much for the conversation. And again, we're thrilled to be N50 partners and helping to really bring some solutions to be able to help countries to be more resilient.
Tremendous thanks, Richard, for that contribution. Joe, you were about to say something?
Oh yeah, you know, Richard, you know, thanks for that. And you know, I just had to. It made me think, you know, about food and food security and Ukraine, and also the unique, you know, nature of not just, you know, the idea of, you know, people not having, you know, food vouchers in a town, in a city, in Galad in Romania, and you know, needing to address something like that. but also in the larger sense where you have the Ukrainian situation and a good percentage of the food that was coming into World Food Program and being distributed through, partners like Food for the Hungry, like World Vision, was disrupted. And Ukraine is talking about how, because of their ports being closed on the Black Sea, that they are needing to get the food out of the country, to start to have new ways of doing that. And communications is always, the center of that, communications and coordination. There's a lot of discussion now about where do the dry docks go on the border countries in the European Union, and how do they change the logistics of, getting the food from the farm, out of the country and into the hands, and the food crisis that's going on consequently because of what's happening in Ukraine in part, and the food shortage, in countries like, Somalia and Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa and Yemen. And so that, communications are critical, and logistics are critical, in that area. And, that's an immense challenge that's impacting Ukraine, and in some ways rest of the world, in the countries where famine could be close.
David, I want to make a quick comment on that. I don't know if you are aware, Mr. Parker, and I hope you are, and that the organization is looking to the future on that. But in the Caribbean, most of the countries, like Puerto Rico, depend on their majority of the food coming from abroad. Puerto Rico is from the United States. 90% of our food comes from the US. Are you aware that we only have 2 weeks worth of food capacity or storage to be able to deal with a disaster? I mean, that in itself, food is very rarely mentioned, but there are organizations in Puerto Rico dealing what they call food insecurity, because we have a major insecurity of food. It's not apparent right now because it's not happening, but it could happen in a snap. So I think I want to make aware, not only in Puerto Rico, but the rest of the Caribbean, those countries that depend on most of their food coming from outside, are in a very perilous situation. And yes, technology can help.
Interesting, Jose Luis and Richard, continuing on the food theme. And I see you, Aaron. So we'll draw this to a close, but I wanted to say, by no coincidence, the first deployment for the Ukraine project that we were involved in was co-located with the World Central Kitchen for delivery of food to the refugees, as well as a food distribution center at what was called Rome Expo in the same location. So it is definitely a recurring theme. And let me just segue from that into a couple of other themes that recurred here on this session, and which have been throughout the entire day. I'm hearing again and again in the middle of all of this is community as part of the strategy. And coming out of community are needs. Digital inclusivity is intertwined with serving those needs. And by recognizing that, then plans and strategies can be developed for sustainability. Things that are put in place with community support and have enduring value and use by the community. So that's what I've been hearing all day long. You subject matter experts here on this panel, as a closing session of the first day of Digital Inclusivity Week and our Thought Leadership Forum, have rammed that point home forcefully. And I'd like to say that we will be taking that away from this conversation and carrying it forward into action through N50 projects. And we hope that you all will join us in that endeavor. Before we begin that, I'd like to thank each of you for your contributions, which were amazing on this session. We're so fortunate to know you and to have the opportunity to work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ali and Jose and Joe. You really did paint a vivid picture of the imperative of digital inclusion. And I truly believe, as David mentioned, that the brain trust and the N50 partnership can be a significant piece of the solution needed for some of our greatest challenges. It was a true reminder of the immediate needs of our digital inclusion as a foundation for survival in the most dire of circumstances. Both infrastructural and essential communications and support for access to basic needs. This was an incredible day of sharing and learning. We're really grateful for all of our speakers today and thankful to the participants who prioritize digital inclusivity in your work and in your thinking. We hope that you heard some insights today that have a future impact on your work, but also our collective work together. And, you know, as imperfect as a virtual conference can be, we're reminded about how we are impacted by digital inclusion each and every day. Virtual conferences have opened up the opportunity to connect without having to navigate the barriers of physical travel. However, without connectivity, attending today isn't even possible for many people, and we want to change that. So tomorrow is another day of programming for our N50 partners. If you're not currently a N50 project partner or charter supporter and you want to be, it's not too late to sign up. So feel free to follow the link that we'll put in the chat again, and it's maybe has showed up earlier in the day. But thank you for this conversation, and we look forward to another provocative conversation lined up to push our thinking tomorrow. Thank you for joining today, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.